And if one man can do, in fact, the book of Nehemiah speaks about what God can do through one man. What God can do, and he may be anybody. Only thing that God is looking for is that he is willing and interested in the things of God. That's make the difference. So we just what is it? Okay, here. Okay, before we go further on the book of Nehemiah, I think we'll have to see the background. And this is the history book. Nehemiah is the history book. And we know the Babylonian invasion. If you look at the year 605 BC, that was the first Babylonian invasion. And we know how the children of God, they slowly turned away from God. And as God has already told them that when they rebel, when they do not remember God, and then God is going to send them to slavery. And that first Babylonian invasion, we read in Daniel, he says Jehoiakim is the king. That was the time the first Babylonian invasion has taken place. And the captives were Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All these people were in the first lot taken as captives to Babylon. I'm not referring to those verses. The second Babylonian invasion was happened when Jehoiakim, that is the son of Jehoiakim, he was king. And those details are given in chapter 36 of 2nd Chronicles. And this time, the captive they have taken is Ezekiel. Ezekiel was taken as a captive, and he was there in Babylon. The third Babylonian invasion was when the king Zedekiah was the king. This was the worst part of invasion, because this was the time the Babylonians totally destroyed the city of Jerusalem. They burned the temple, the walls. It's absolutely, they ruined the city of Jerusalem. And there was none left in Jerusalem, in Israel. All those people were taken as a captives. So in fact, when you look at the city of Jerusalem, we see it's a ghost city. Absolutely no life. And few people were left behind, only few, who are poor and who cannot do anything, who are not intelligent, not studied, educated. All such people are laborers, they were left behind, and people, they thought they're good for nothing. Those are the people were left behind, and the rest of them were taken away as captives. So there are 3 invasions, and the people of Israel, the people of God, were slaves. And then this, in year 539, the Persia invaded Babylon. The Persian invasion, see how God works in his sovereignty, plans things. And here is a Babylon, the mighty kings of those times who ruled the whole earth. And here comes the king of Persia, and who invades Babylon. That was the turning point for the people of Israel. That was the time when God started fulfilling the promise that God has made. And it was the prophesied earlier. I think this was the only king who was prophesied by name. The Lord has promised Cyrus, the king, Persia, will come, and he will allow the people of God to go back and return to Jerusalem and build the temple. So that was the turning point. Now, when we see the post-exilic period, when the people started coming back to Jerusalem, that was again in lot. The first group of Israelites returned to their homeland. That was in 537 BC. The Lord used Zerubbabel. He was a royal king. He was in the royal lineage. The Lord has used a king to take the people from the bondage to Jerusalem. And he was the man who built the temple. And 70 years after it had been destroyed, 516 BC. If you look at third Babylonian invasion, 586, and you see the 516 BC, that exactly 70 years after the temple was totally destroyed, the temple was rebuilt. What an accurate timing. What a calendar God has. What every day, month, and year it works. His clock is perfect. Maybe we may think that why things are happening, but God's clock works absolutely on time. And that's what God did. The first lot of people returned to their homeland. It was to build the temple. The priority was temple. Then second group of people in the year 458 BC, Israelites returned. This time God has used a priest. Who was he? Ezra. So God has used a king, God has used a priest, and in the year of 445, God has used an ordinary man, a cupbearer. And that was Nehemiah, who brought people back to the... Now, Ezra was instrumental in resuming the temple, the rituals, restoring the people to God. And Zerubbabel built the temple, and Ezra was encouraging them spiritually and bringing them back to do those things which they were doing before they were sent to captive. And lastly, Nehemiah was instrumental in building the wall. Vijay, this is troubling. I'm not going to build. Oh. Yeah, you can operate from there is also good. Next row. Okay. So we look at Nehemiah. That's the portion we have looked at the background. So Nehemiah, it was in the year 445 BC. That means 2,650 years ago, what we are discussing about the historical thing that happened. The book of Nehemiah is named after the main character, that is Nehemiah. And in fact, it's a historical book. Some people say it should come before Malachi. If you put it in order, it should come in that order. But some says it has to be after Ezra, and Ezra and Nehemiah, actually these two are one book in the earlier, the Bible. Initially, they used to consider Ezra and Nehemiah as one book. You know, First Samuel, Second Samuel is considered as one book. First Chronicles, Second Chronicles is one book. First Kings and Second Kings is one book. So later on, for the convenience sake, they were divided into. So Ezra and Nehemiah also considered as one book. But when they do the Latin translation, that was the time they separated it, because there are two separate characters were there. And Nehemiah, the meaning of Nehemiah is the comfort of the Lord. He left that for the people of Israel. He could have been a prince in the palace, Pharaoh's palace. He left it. And these names were written in the book of Hebrews, a faithful man, Moses. I don't know why they forgot Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a man who represents Christ, shows Christ how he left heavenly glory, came down emptied. And this man left all that he had and emptied himself, came down to the place and served the Lord. And Jesus wept over Jerusalem. Jesus, when he saw, I think it's better to read Matthew 23, 37. Somebody, if you can read. Today, please, we'll be looking at the introduction, and God willing, we'll go into the details. 37. O Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them, which are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Here is it. The Lord looking at the people, a rebellious people who were not willing to come under his wings. Here, this man looked at the destruction that has happened because of their rebellion against God, wept over Jerusalem, mourned certain days, fasted and prayed. And we see the Jesus high priestly prayer. He prayed, Lord, I do not want them to be taken away from, but you keep them. And Nehemiah prayed an intercessory prayer. Just look at chapter 1. And one more thing, what we see, the Christ in Nehemiah, the book, Jesus drove them all. They are doing business in the temple. You remember? My house, my father's house is called a house of prayer. You made it a den of thieves. And he threw them out. And that's what exactly Nehemiah did in chapter 13. When the high priest, Eliashib, brought Tobiah into the house of the Lord. And he has occupied the temple, the prime place where the offerings were being given, are kept. He came back. He threw him out. Cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah. See the jealous for God. See that house of God is being misused. He cannot control himself. This is where we see Jesus Christ in the book of Nehemiah. Next. Some of those words, very familiar verses in the Bible, in the book of Nehemiah. What is that word comes to us? When we look at Nehemiah, what is the first thing comes to our mind? Come, let us build. What a word of encouragement, isn't it? He did not say, I will build. Come, let us build. Come together. Come, let us build. Come together, we do. And then what is the answer they give in verse 18? They all said, come, let us raise and build. That's the response of the people, because they know, they saw this man came down from the chosen palace in the highest position to be with them, to build the wall. And in chapter 4, verse 6 is we built the wall. The people had a mind to work. I think that talks about something that they have accomplished. We built the wall. What a satisfaction, isn't it? I came for this purpose and it's done. The people had a mind to work. It speaks to us so many things. Do we have a mind to work? If we have a mind to work, Nehemiah had a mind to work. He has minded God's business. And God has fulfilled. And when the enemies came to him, they wanted to oppose, they wanted to disturb him, they wanted him to come down and discuss things. And they were planning secretly to even kill him. In chapter 6, we see. That's the time what he says, I am doing. Come, let us discuss. You know the place, what they call it? You know the place? That is, you know is the place. Come, let us discuss. And he said, oh no. Come to the place of He said, no. Oh no, I don't come. Come, let us discuss. He said, no, I am doing a great work. I cannot come down. I cannot leave this place, leave this work and come down to discuss. That means my attention cannot be diverted. I am focused on the things of God. I don't want to deviate from that. Isn't it? I am doing a great work. That means that shows how much importance that this man gives for the work. He feels, have you ever felt doing something for God? You're doing so great a job. I'm doing great work. Brothers and sisters, whatever you do for Christ, for God, it's a great work. Feel that you are doing a great work and you don't want to deviate from that. That's the wonderful statement. I think sometime back I just spoke on this. I'm doing a great work so that I cannot come down. The wall was finished in 52 days. The wall was finished in 52 days. What a joy it is. But remember, it was 52 days. But when he heard the problem, how many days he prayed? In chapter 1, it says, for 4 months. 4 months. Some say it's 5 months because there's the Hebrew months, we cannot calculate 30 days. So 4 months, or even if it is a 5 months, it is more than 120 days he fasted. After he heard the news, he did not immediately react. He prayed for 4 months. That means for the work of 52 days, his prayer was 120 days. I was ashamed to, when for 6 weeks of Bible study, how much time I spent in prayer. For every day, I think 2.5 days prayer. For every day work, he spent 2.5 days. What a man of prayer. And in fact, he's a man of prayer. You look at the Nehemiah, the book, and his prayers were, and 2 places it was so lengthy, chapter 1 and in chapter 6, I think. The rest of the prayers were 1-liner, 2-liners. Isn't it? See, look at the wall finished. And I think we'll come back to that. It's 1-liner, 2-liner prayers. It's quite encouraging. You don't have to pray the lengthy prayer, brothers and sisters. It should be a quality prayer, maybe 1-liner, 2-liner. And it's encouraging. When he was meeting the enemies, he was shooting a prayer. When he was meeting the king, he was shooting a prayer. What a man of prayer. How do we pray? Do we pray? When we meet others in a critical situation, do we shoot out a prayer to the Lord? Lord, help me. And that's what the book of Nehemiah tells us. What a man of prayer. The joy of the Lord is your strength. What a joy. The man who is the comfort of the Lord, he says, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And chapter 10 verse 13, we will not forsake the house of God. Who said it? It's not Nehemiah. It's the people who said, when the wall was completed, when all those rituals are reestablished and people started bringing and arranging the Sabbath and all those things they are doing, that's the time they dedicated themselves, all the Levites and their families, all of them come together. Chapter 10 verse 29, what they say, we will not forsake the house of God. They made a wonderful statement. Do we do that? Sad to see on Tuesday, Brother Narsinga was sharing the word. I'm sharing with you because that speaks about how we are as a Christians, as a believers. 5 people were there, 6 I think at the most, on Tuesday, last Tuesday. We used to have 5 groups, 2 sisters groups, 2 men, 4 groups. It was 1 group of 6 people. And we want things to happen here. Will it happen? I don't think so. On Sunday morning, we see 100 and odd people, sometimes finding it difficult to put the chairs. Where do we put? Now we'll have to put a board saying on Sunday morning, please, no more No entry, please. The house is full. But on Tuesday, I'm sad to say this, 6 of them were praying out of 100. What encouragement the man who is giving a word will have, what encouragement the brothers will have. No, some of you are busy, some of you are working, that's understood. But not, it cannot be out of 100 only 6. So that speaks about the work we are involved in. Are we expecting things to happen in this assembly? Are we looking to God? God work, God happen these things. Would it happen? May the Lord enable us, encourage us to examine our hearts. Next, Vijay. Yeah, we come to the Nehemiah's prayer. He prayed for 4 months for the work which he completed in 52 days. I think I'm ahead of my slides. Huh? So you'll have it. So Nehemiah book has a 406 verses, out of which 54 verses are on prayer. Almost 11 to 12% on prayer. So every second or third verse, just, yeah. The one important thing is chapter 1. When he heard the news, what he did, he sat down and wept. He kneeled down and prayed. And then he decided and determined, he stood up to work. What is our reaction? His prayer. See, look at these last few lines. What is his prayer? Just a short prayer. Remember me, oh my God, concerning this. And when he was engaged in a dialogue with the people, he was shooting in between. It's an encouraging word to see. Remembering them, remember them, oh my God, remember them. Remember me. Oh God, strengthen my hands. Verse 6-9. Verse chapter 4. Here, oh God, we are despised. Chapter 5-9. Think of me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for these people. I think the true, real prayer is seeing something very personal, making it like talking to your friend. Lord, remember me. Lord, you know what is happening. And remember them. And why don't you deal with them? Isn't it wonderful? We make a prayer, not a formal prayer, going, I think you are a man of prayer. And that shows he was in communion with God. Whatever he does, he is in communion. He is shooting in between. He was dealing with the people and sending a prayer to God. Isn't it wonderful? It's a practice. It doesn't come just like that. It comes with the practice that you are in tune with God. You wanted to share things with God, whatever you do. You want God to have control in your life. You want God to intervene. You want God to work. You want God to work with the enemies. And that's what his prayer. And there was in between Ezra and bringing all the people, and he blessed the Lord. Okay, next. Okay. So this is the last slide for today. I think if you wish, I will have another 3-4 slides, but I want to be on time. That's starting or closing. So Nehemiah's concern. The book begins with a prayer and ends with a prayer. You read that book. Not exactly begins with a prayer. When he heard the word, he prayed. And his concern. See that chapter 1, verse 2. I asked them concerning the Jews and concerning Jerusalem. See, when you meet somebody, what is the question that you ask? I think his brother came after a long time. We don't know how long. Very often they meet. We have no details there. But when he came, what was the first thing he was inquiring him? His concern was what? For the Jews. His concern was for Jerusalem. I think his heart is full of God and his people. It's God and his people. So blessed are those parents who brought this Nehemiah in the fear of God. I think otherwise there's nothing that can tell us how Nehemiah had such a strong faith and the love for God and for his people, unless and until it was taught at home and made him aware that you have a place. That's our promised land. That's our city. That's our God. That's how we do things. Those are our people. I think what a strong desire. His concern was for God and for his people. What is our concern? I think he speaks volumes, Nehemiah. The first thing I was wondering, how, when we meet, what do we talk? His concern, how was the church? How are the people, believers? That is first primary concern. Psalm 137, just quickly somebody read it for me. Psalm 137 verse 5 and 6. The psalmist says how he is so much concerned. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. For Nehemiah, it was Jerusalem is his chief joy. That is, joy of the Lord is your strength. His concern was God. His concern was God's people. His concern was church. His body was in Persia, but his heart was in Jerusalem. 800 kilometers away, almost 1300 kilometers, 800, I think, miles. It is 1300 kilometers. What a concern. And his burden. And I told no one, but my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. His burden, God has put. This is I think these are the two verses where we see it was God who put burden into his heart. Otherwise, the moment he had, he wanted to react, he wanted to go, he wanted to build. But here in these two verses, what he says is, it is God who put this burden in my heart to do for Jerusalem. Brothers and sisters, does God put any burden in your heart? In my heart, do I feel burdened about? I think what a burden. And that man proved his faithfulness. A God who put his burden in his heart is not ashamed to call Nehemiah his servant. Then my God put into my heart to assemble the nobles and the officials. So in these two places where it says, it's God who put this burden into my heart. It's God. I think he made him restless unless and until you do things. Yeah, next. Oh, that's it. We are on time. We'll go to the, don't look at, there is a wall that will come next week. Okay, that's it. When we looked at this is the introduction, I think it's given a lengthy, long introduction, but we'll see in the next 5 weeks what God has kept in store for us, what all the things we can learn and we can glean from his word. And please do pray for me. I have not planned anything for the 6 weeks. I'm going 1 week at a time. So let me do things, justify the trust the assembly has put on me, so that we together, let's, as Nehemiah said, let us build, let us read, let us understand God's word. May God encourage each one of us. Thank you.